first up is a new documentary called GameStop, Rise of the Players, and it follows along the, if you remember January 2021, the absolutely wild ride that the GameStop stock went through, that, AMC theaters went through, because stock market participants just as individuals went all in and tried to sort of stick it to the man that is hedge funds. And, these are stocks that maybe under normal circumstances, you'd be like, well, GameStop is a business that's more or less their model is defunct. People constantly compare it to Blockbuster. And in this documentary, you'll hear that 200,000 times. And AMC is a company that was being heavily impacted by the pandemic. And so why would you invest in these? Great question. I wish this documentary did a better job of explaining it. So it follows a lot of the people who were the drivers behind this wild ride. The stock went from something like sub $4 to $400 in a matter of days, and hedge funds were panicking, and, companies like Robinhood were impacting it, where they suddenly stopped people from trading. And again, I witnessed this, from the outside. I did not participate. It just seemed absolutely bonkers to me. But, I guess kudos to the people who did make money off of it, and this film does profile them, but so I wish it had done a better job of explaining the mechanics of what was going on. It does address them, but it does it in a way that really requires a base level knowledge of it, and it almost made it more confusing in some senses. Also, they rely on YouTube videos to do it, and it doesn't feel complete to me, and it's not super accessible, which is what I was hoping that this would do. I guess I should have taken a note from the title being Rise of the Players, in that it focused on the, quote, players, the people in the game who forced the stock price up, essentially. But I think my other thing about those people is that, it was the 99% of the people interviewed were men, and 100%, well, actually, no, 98% were white. And, that's something that sort of stuck out, a little bit in. I was like, oh boy, okay, I realized that who this is sort of targeted at. And also, I do think that speaks to, who investing is targeted at and how it's exclusionary to a lot of groups. In fact, the one person of color does sort of make a comment about how different cultures perceive the idea of investing, because it's basically gambling. But anyway, I wish that this movie had been much more accessible. I was really hoping for a great deep dive explanation of it. I mean, ironically, if you want to look at a movie like The Big Short, which is a fictionalized explanation of a real stock market thing happening, it still does a really good job of explaining it, but this does not. In fact, I felt like I left more confused after having watched this than I did going in, because they go deep into the lingo of Wall Street Bets, which is the Reddit thread that was doing a lot of the driving behind this, or where a lot of the discussions took place. And the vernacular there is just too much for me to comprehend in an hour and a half movie, because it seems like a dark, scary place. But GameStop, Rise of the Players. I think if you were looking for this to be your entertaining explanation of what happened, and you didn't know exactly what was going on January 2021, I would maybe not choose this as the vehicle. I do think that if you were involved in it, you'll feel sort of vindicated by this documentary. I do think that it's very pro the people who participated. It's sort of the David Goliath mythos. And, I'm not a fan of hedge funds necessarily, but I'm also I also don't think it addressed the negative impact that this sort of, roller coaster of a moment in time had on people. It only featured people who benefited from it, but really, it doesn't address the fact that this is one thing I do know about stocks. If you sell a stock in, less than a calendar year after owning it, you have to pay short-term capital gains taxes, which are much higher than if you hold on to it for a year, and you pay a lot less percentage. And so I don't think people were calculating that when they were making all this money. They were making it and then spending it immediately. I think there are probably plenty of people who lost a considerable amount of money during this period of time because they didn't enter at the right price and didn't leave at the right price and all that stuff. But those people are not featured at all. And so this is, very, very one-sided in terms of saying it was a beneficial thing that happened. So GameStop, Rise of the Players. I want someone to cover this in a way. I want GameStop for dummies, basically. I want that in an entertaining way, because I'm sure there are plenty of pieces of content out there that explain what happened, but this is a movie medium. You do have to be somewhat entertaining with it. So unfortunately, I'm only going to give it 2.5 out of 5. And then next up is a new show on Apple TV Plus. It's called The Afterparty, and it has a huge ensemble all-star cast. It's got Tiffany Haddish, Sam Richardson, Zoe Chow, Ben Schwartz, Ike Barinholtz, Ilana Glazer, Jamie Demetriou, Dave Franco, John Early, and it comes from Chris Miller and Phil Lord, who you might know from the Lego movies and things like the 21 Jump Street reboot, but so it took me a couple episodes to get into this. It's a whodunit that takes place between a group of high school classmates. They're at their reunion and somebody has been murdered at an after party. I don't think that's a spoiler because it's in the log line of the show. And so what I think the show does really successfully is that each episode is a different genre or theme in terms of how it presents it. So, there's a romantic comedy, there's a Fast and the Furious-esque one, there's a musical. And when I finally figured out that that's what they were doing, so basically by the second episode, I was like, oh. And the way that they adapt the characters to each different style is so impressive. Like the nuances of the acting styles, right? Because it's a lot of the times you're seeing the same set of events through the different lenses of the different genre that it's switched to. And, the way that the characters perform, it's just, it's super impressive. It's one of those moments that makes me go, oh yeah, actors are actually really talented because, you have to deliver a line one way and then you have to deliver it a completely different way. And it's such a subtle difference, but it just makes such an impact. So it's a comedy. I will be blatant about that, even though there are some dramatic episodes. It's comedy. Tiffany Haddish plays the detective who sort of weaves all the episodes together. I absolutely adore Ben Schwartz. I think he's hilarious in this. I think everyone is very funny in this. Everyone's very committed, which I think also is a huge determining factor in whether or not comedy like this can be successful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, it was a slightly slow start, but once it got going, I was really into it. So my recommendation is give it the first 3 episodes. If you really don't like it, no, you're not going to like the rest of it. But The Afterparty is out streaming now on Apple TV Plus. And then in a bizarre similar vein, I've also got The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window, which is out on Netflix. It's supposed to be a send-up of all of those Lifetime whodunit type movies, between your Gone Girl, between your Woman in the Window, all of these types of things. And it stars Kristen Bell, and I wanted it to be funny. I wanted it to be amazing. We did a Netflix movie last week on our roundtable episodes of the podcast, and it was Nora Roberts' Brazen, and that is a type of movie that this series or mini-series is trying to make fun of. The problem is something like Brazen is so bad, but it's almost enjoyable because it's trying to be one thing, and it's trying to be serious about it. And its dedication to it is what is laughable because the genre itself is so absurd, right? But then when you're trying to parody or satirize it, there's something about it that is just, they get a lot of the things right in that she's always drinking way too much wine, right? It's like an entire bottle poured into a glass at all times. There's just little off things that any normal person would be like, that's the killer, that's the problem, that's whatever. But there's something about the way it's strung together that is just, it's not funny. And also, you don't care what happens in the murder mystery. Where something like The Afterparty, it's a comedy, it's making fun of a lot of things, but I still wanted to know who did it at the end of this. This, I'm like, you're being so absurd with the, clues and all these things that it's too absurd that I don't care. I'm not hooked by the core of the story that you're still driving it through. So I'm just watching Kristen Bell trying to give this deranged performance as a housewife who's hallucinating or maybe not, and she's in love with the neighbor and all. There's just all of these things that I wanted it to be good, or I wanted it to be funny, but it was just kind of a slog to get through. So unfortunately, I would say I think you're going to have a better time if you just watch some of the more serious, ridiculous Lifetime whodunit type murder things. I think I wanted it to be something more like American Vandal, which is also on Netflix, which is a true crime parody itself, but they take the actual crime, in quotes, so seriously, and all the characters are just living in a world that is accessible. And to me, I think that's an imperative difference. So unfortunately, I'm going to say avoid The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window.